Welcome, Dick. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good to be here. Well, it's absolutely important. We've been going, I don't know, over 30 years now probably on the research. You can't actually develop instruments like we have in TMS without adequate research. It really annoys me there's so many products around where somebody has these 10 questions, they put it up on Facebook, and it's meant to tell you about all the inner secrets of your life. That's absolute rubbish because it might apply to one or two people who wrote them, but not to everybody. So when you develop models like we have and questionnaires, they've got to be tested and retested and over-tested really, particularly to look at things like reliability and internal consistency, temporal stability, where you do a test maybe a year later to see if people's views have changed, validity studies, all of those things are incorporated in the new edition of RM5. Well, pretty good. It's been a very huge job, particularly for Nikki, who was grinding all the statistics, because what we've done is increase the database from about 300,000 people to over 500,000. And all of that data had to be analysed, particularly in looking at the information we got in. Sometimes the industry codes wouldn't be in there, the job that they were doing wasn't accurate. So Nikki had to do further questioning to find out individuals. And you can imagine how many phone calls and emails she had to do this. But the great thing about this, we have now been able to increase particularly the number of profession data, where we look at the various professions and the role around the wheel, up to something like 293 different professions. Quantity surveyors, engineers, marketing people, people who are art curators, and this enables us to actually look at the distribution of roles around the wheel for each of these professions. And I think this is going to be very adequate, or very, very important for network members when they're working with engineers or they're working with people in an organisation who particularly want to ask, well, what are other engineers like? Now they'll be able to provide them with that data. Well, I think one thing to do is if anybody asks a question about how psychometrically active is this model, then they'll be able to delve into that particular part of the manual which describes some of the reliability data, particularly the validity data, looking at the relationships with the Myers-Briggs type indicator, relationships with the 16PF, looking at the work versus the non-work, and particularly looking at the norm data. And there we've been able to, people can choose to look at the analysis for men versus women, for all the 293 professions, countries around the world, how the country differential occurs, and that can be very useful data to make their workshop come alive. Yeah, I think that's a difficult one because the manual's over 1,000 pages, and it's very hard for practitioners to come across it. So I think all they can do is perhaps point to the British Psychological Society's evaluation of the model, where it's got 4 to 5 stars on most things. And I think also if somebody asks questions, maybe they can loan them the manual and saying, well, have a look at this, and tomorrow when we get together, perhaps I can talk in a bit more detail about it. Usually they all go away and don't come back in that particular case. But I think all the manuals are tremendously useful there. And also I should mention that the norm data in the QO2 is quite interesting, because there we were able to provide distributions of people's QO2 in terms of a graph form, which enables people to look at what the median and quartile values are, which I think will be very useful in resilience programs where that can be provided to people to see how their QOT varies from situation to situation. Well, I think it's one of the great things, not only that, but percentile norms as well. For each of the 4 constructs, yes. We have got something like 400 pages of 600, well, yeah, 600 pages of percentile norms covering just about everything. So network members will be able to show how the distribution of EI, PC, AB or SF relate to this particular profession, this particular country, this particular group of people. And I think some of the more research-oriented network members would probably take a copy of this and actually deliver this into the workshop, which answers a lot of questions, I think, about the distributions, the normal distributions of these particular characteristics. I think one of the things that I've quite liked looking at is the differentiation of the profession groups, where you can compare particularly like priests and people working in support jobs, that where there's so many more reporter advisors and upholder maintainers than you see in any of the other ones, which gives those characteristics of priests and chaplains being essentially different sort of people from people working in businesses. And that's quite an interesting one. And also you find high analytical scores amongst engineers and quantity surveyors, I think, where I know in my old profession of chemical engineering, I think the mean A is about 16, I think, 15 or 16. And that's a pretty high score about, well, an engineer has to be very analytical in all the decisions they make and all of the work that they do. So you can actually relate the scores on the each of the areas to people's jobs. And I think that's quite amazing too. Well, I think you'll find that when you look at the worldwide data, there's a definite bias to the right-hand part of the team management wheel. That's because, I guess, when most organisations are producing something, they have to organise to deadlines to deliver. So normally you require many more people working in those particular areas of work than you do on the other side in the creator, innovator and reporter advisor. Where you find more of them tends to be in subgroups within the organisation. I remember when I did some work many years ago for Hewlett-Packard in Palo Alto, working in the research department there. There was something like, I think somewhere in the 25% of them were in the creator-innovator area in terms of their preference. And this is significantly greater than the worldwide data. So they are there, but they tend to be in groups where they're more in advising roles and particularly innovating roles. But basically, we need more people into concluding, producing and thruster organising than we do people on the other side. And that's why compositions in teams tend to be biased in that area. Where the problem comes is if they're all thruster organisers and all concluded producers, then maybe, just maybe, they'll race ahead and make decisions without gathering all the information. Or maybe they'll want the status quo to stay and not be interested in new ideas. Well, we never thought it was going to be as successful as this. I mean, when we first started working together in 1982, it was just, I think, both of our passions to look at new ideas and think up new ways of doing things, and never thought that it would go the way it has. And I think it's been successful because of the huge amount of research we've put in. We started researching in 1982, and RM5 has just come out. And a lot of this work has been done by Nikki Mead, who headed up our Institute of Team Management Studies for quite a while. And we've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of hours making sure everything is robust, of all of our models meet all of the criteria for reliability, for validity. There's norm data. We've got extensive manuals. Everything we do is robust. And that's why I think it's been so successful. A lot of the other models, which are, I've often seen people on a bar over a glass of beer have some ideas and draw a four-fold quadrant model in the slops and say, oh, we can have this person here, here's 4 areas, oh, this is a great model, let's try and market that. And that lasts, a few months. But research is the basis of success in our industry.